Hello, welcome back to Talking Europe with me, Catherine Nicholson, joined here at the European Commission in Brussels by the man who leads the European Union's External Action Service, its diplomatic arm, with 144 EU ambassadors and heads of delegation reporting to the service. Its Secretary General is Stefano Sannino. Thank you very much for being on Talking Europe once again.
Thank you very much. Thanks to you.
I'd like to start by talking about some of the latest developments in Ukraine, which is, of course, such a dominant issue for the European Union and its institutions. We're speaking at the end of a week when Russian forces have been evacuating civilians from the Ukrainian city of Nicholson. As France 24's Ukraine correspondent Gulliver Cragg told us, it's not clear at this point how many of these evacuations are being carried out on a voluntary basis, and how many are, in fact, compulsory deportations. What's your assessment?
Well, unfortunately, we do not have a clear sense of if this is forced or a voluntary evacuation of the city. But it is true that there are more and more indications that there is a lot of pressure coming on the Russian side, with people being forced to move, including children, and it's a very worrying development, and it has been said this is a sort of act of terror that is being exerted over the population in Ukraine. So the development is extremely worrying, and President Zelensky, when addressed the European Council on Thursday night, was giving a very worrying picture of the situation in the country, and of the determination of the Russians to keep on putting pressure, trying to bend the will of the Ukrainian people.
Also this week, Ukraine's government warned of a growing threat of a new Russian offensive, not coming in from Russian territory, but from Belarus, a Russian ally, of course. This after Minsk and Moscow announced a joint force to, in their words, defend Belarusian borders. Ukraine said that Russian aviation units are now deploying from bases in Belarus on the border with Ukraine. Belarus insisting this is all purely defensive. Do you believe them?
I mean, for the time being, Belarus has tried as much as they could to avoid being fully involved into the conflict, which does not mean that they are not, let's say, giving in to the pressure coming from Moscow. But the regime is also very much aware of the fact that this war is extremely unpopular in the country, and they are not sure of having full control over all their security structures. So they are trying to avoid this to happen, but at the same time, it is also true that they are supporting Russia in allowing them to go through their territory, and they are helping Russia in circumventing our sanctions. And that's one of the reasons why we also want to align much more the sanctions vis-à-vis Russia with sanctions with Belarus.
So more stronger sanctions on Belarus could be on the way?
Yeah.
Moving on to another particularly difficult relationship for the European Union for many reasons, the one with Iran. One reason, in recent days, Russian forces have used drones as a means of attack, smashing them into Ukrainian buildings with civilian residences, for example. Now, these are Iranian drones, it's believed, here in the EU. Tehran denies that it sold drones to Russia after the invasion on February 24th. But the EU tells us there is evidence. 3 military leaders in Iran have been sanctioned, also an Iranian military drone manufacturer. Are you able to share with us what this evidence is in the face of Tehran's protestations?
Well, the evidence is about to say, because the drones have been found, and then they've been opened, and we have seen from inside the components and the producers. So it's difficult to say that they are not Iranians, because, I mean, our experts are
irrefutable evidence.
They are sure that this is the case. Now, the problem is that it's more, if you want to see if this has been done more on a commercial basis, or it has been a way of supporting Russia in their military venture in Ukraine.
Now, these are very targeted sanctions, as I said, on individuals and one entity, a manufacturer. Will these dissuade Iran from cooperating with Russia? It's very limited scope, isn't it?
That's why I was saying. I mean, there is a distinction to be made between the fact that we have found Iranian drones in Ukraine. To the other point, which is also relevant about Iranian instructors to use these drones, and the political support that Iran could give to Russia. On the first two cases, we have more hard evidence that this is the case. On the third one, about the overall political determination to side with Russia in this war, it's something that there is still, let's say, a certain distance. So we cannot say that they are openly supporting Russia in the war.
So the EU hoping to perhaps persuade Iran to step back from this relationship with Russia rather than fully going in with very strong sanctions at this point?
We have a lot of contacts with the Iranians, not only on this, but also in the context of the work that we have been doing under the JCPOA, the nuclear deal. As contacts that we are developing and High Representative Josep Borrell with his counterpart in Iran, all our colleagues. So there are a lot of exchanges from that point of view, and we'll continue to push and to insist in order to avoid, as you said, this sort of alignment between Iran and Russia.
As I said, it is a particularly tricky relationship for the EU with Iran on many fronts. You mentioned yourself the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. It was for a while seen as a bit of a triumph of diplomacy for the EU, but then the United States pulled out under Donald Trump in 2018. Now, with the EU sanctioning Iranians over these ties with Russia, we also see these great many deaths across the country amid the protests following the death of Mahsa Amini. Is it right to say at this point that the JCPOA cannot be revived?
I mean, I wouldn't go as far as this, in the sense that we are still working on that, and we have still hope that an agreement can be reached. I think that the objective of not having Iran as a nuclear power continues to be very important and very relevant. So it's worth trying till the very, very end. And for the time being, the Iranians have not pulled out from negotiations. So we will continue pushing in this direction. But I hear what you say and agree that this deterioration of the situation in the ground when it comes to the rights of women and young women, but also in general of the civil society, with the repression of the protests and what we're seeing with the drones, are certainly not elements that are going in the right direction.
Well, speaking about human rights, the European Union reviewing its relations with China, this in light of evidence of massive human rights violations against Uyghurs and other populations, as well as China's stance towards Russia regarding the war in Ukraine. Now, given that recent United Nations report about the Uyghurs, which was very strong, and the EU's traditional characterization of itself as a defender of human rights, isn't a change of stance by the EU towards Beijing somewhat obligatory at this point?
I think that the relations with China is a very complex relationship, and we have to see it under the different points of view. In 2019, we have agreed among the 27 a strategic framework to define the relationship between the EU and China, and we have said that China at the same time is a partner in certain areas, like for example the fight against climate change, or when we speak about the health issues, pandemics, where we need to work together. It's a competitor from an economic point of view, but also, I would say, more broadly from a political point of view, because I mean, it's not only the economic model that is competing with ours, but also the political model that they are competing with ours, and they are saying that their system is more effective than ours, and we call them also a systemic rival. That is to say that in a number of areas, and that's the human rights is certainly the most relevant one, we have really diverging views and opposing views. They have a conception of human rights which is based on collective rights, which are determined, by the way, by the leadership, which are the rights that have to be defended. We are a very strong supporter of individual rights and of the need for each individual to be protected.
Just got time to talk about one last EU and external country relationship, that with the UK. Liz Truss resigned as Prime Minister this week, the shortest ever term of Prime Minister in the UK's history. President Macron and others in the EU have talked about political instability in the United Kingdom being a concern for them. Is it a concern for you?
It is a concern for everybody. When a country like the UK is not managing to have a sort of stable political framework, it is always worrying from many points of view. At the same time, I think that the solidity of the democracy of the country, but also of the administration, is an element that is always helping in a way to face turbulences, even when the political picture, the political spectrum is more complicated and more difficult.
You would also share that sentiment of President Macron then?
It's instability. It's not good in small and big countries. We need, especially when it comes to foreign policy, stability and predictability are very key elements. I mean, unfortunately, the external relations are not in love with chaos.
Right, and that's where we'll end our interview. Thank you very much, Stefano Sannino, for being on Talking Europe.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks to you for watching as well. Do stay tuned to France 24.